After the Yorkist defeat at Ludford Bridge in 1459, their leaders were driven into exile. Richard of York fled to Ireland, while Salisbury and his son Warwick took refuge in Calais, a territory still under English control. But this exile did not mark the end of the Yorkist cause. It was the beginning of a new phase of preparation. Under Warwick's command, Calais became more than a safe haven. It functioned as an independent stronghold. There, he consolidated not just military power, but also naval and political influence. His control over the English fleet gave him a decisive strategic edge. During this period, the Yorkists were not simply waiting, they were laying the groundwork for a renewed campaign, both militarily and diplomatically. Meanwhile, public opinion in England began to shift in Warwick's favour. The 1459 Coventry Parliament, remembered as the Parliament of Devils, had declared Warwick, York and Salisbury traitors. But instead of appearing just, the act was widely seen as a political purge. Warwick, known for his communication with commoners and reputation as a champion of order, gained even greater popularity in the eyes of the people. In June 1460, Warwick, Salisbury and young Edward, York's son and the Earl of March, crossed the Channel and landed on the shores of Kent. To their surprise, they were welcomed warmly. The people of Kent did not see them as rebels, but as saviours who had returned to restore the kingdom's balance. Warwick's charisma had a powerful effect on the crowds. It wasn't just the commoners, merchants and some local officials also quietly supported the Yorkist return. Facing little resistance, Warwick's forces advanced toward London. Soon after, the gates of the capital were opened. The event was both symbolic and strategic. The Yorkists had returned not only with weapons, but with public backing. Warwick was no longer a fugitive. He had become a figure of authority and order within the capital itself. With that momentum, the Yorkists turned north to confront King Henry VI's forces. Just weeks after Warwick entered London, the Yorkist army began its march northward. Their goal was to locate the royal army and force a shift in the political balance. King Henry VI had set up camp near Northampton in the Midlands. The Lancastrians had chosen a defensive position protected by rivers and marshes, terrain that gave them a natural advantage. Among the Yorkist commanders were Warwick, Salisbury and Edward of March. But this confrontation wasn't just a military manoeuvre, it was also a psychological battle. The Yorkist message was carefully crafted. They claimed to be fighting not against the king, but against his evil counsellors. The aim was to undermine loyalty within the king's army. Surprisingly, the tactic worked. Lord Grey of Ruthin, one of the royal commanders, secretly pledged to switch sides before the battle. Ongoing property disputes had led Grey to seek favour from Yorkist allies in court, and Warwick promised to support his claims in return for his defection. On the morning of July 10th, the two armies faced each other across muddy ground under rainy skies. The king's forces held a defensive line, but the Yorkists advanced rapidly. At the critical moment of engagement, Grey's troops abandoned the Lancastrian ranks and joined the Yorkist side. The sudden betrayal sparked panic. The Lancastrian line collapsed. King Henry VI was taken without resistance, for the second time, the first being at St. Albans. But now the political context was more severe. The Yorkists no longer sought mere reform, they were aiming for power itself. Margaret of Anjou and the young Prince Edward were not present on the battlefield. Anticipating the coming conflict, they had fled northward in advance. Their escape severely undermined the morale of the Lancastrian leadership. In Yorkist propaganda, Margaret's absence was framed as the Queen abandoning her people. The Battle of Northampton was not a large-scale military engagement, but its political implications were seismic. The king's capture by the Yorkists for a second time reignited the question of constitutional order. With this victory, Warwick emerged not only as a battlefield commander, but also as a public symbol of stability. His image shifted from general to statesman. This moment marked the beginning of his transformation into the figure later known as the Kingmaker. Following the Yorkist victory at Northampton, they once again seized the political initiative. King Henry VI remained a prisoner, Margaret was still in flight, and Warwick had restored order in London. In October 1460, Richard of York finally returned from his exile in Ireland. But York's return was not just the comeback of a noble, it was followed by an unexpected and shocking move. Upon arriving at Westminster, York entered Parliament and, according to some accounts, walked straight toward the throne. Some chroniclers claim he even stood behind it for a time, as if staking an unspoken claim. This gesture, though brief, was deeply symbolic and unsettling. A heavy silence reportedly fell over the lords. Even Warwick, Salisbury, and other Yorkist leaders had not anticipated such a direct bid for kingship. Up until that point, their cause had been framed as one of loyal reform, opposing corrupt advisers, not the king himself. York had just changed that narrative. York's claim rested not only on military success, but on dynastic legitimacy. In his view, Henry IV had usurped the throne in 1399, unlawfully replacing Richard II. As a result, Henry VI, descended from that usurpation, had no rightful claim. York, by contrast, descended from Lionel of Antwerp, Edward III's second son, whereas the Lancastrians descended from John of Gaunt, the third son. According to York, true hereditary right belonged to his line. This was not just a political challenge, it was a direct assault on England's entire understanding of royal succession. Many lords were unprepared for it. A portion of the nobility, concerned with national stability, hesitated to support removing a sitting monarch. York's action created a rupture. It was no longer about advising the king, it was about replacing him. This moment transformed the Wars of the Roses from a constitutional crisis into a battle for the crown itself. York's bold claim to the throne shocked both Parliament and the broader political community. Though his legal argument was strong, the sudden transfer of royal power risked plunging the realm into chaos. To diffuse this tension, Parliament proposed a compromise on October 25, 1460, the Act of Accord. Under this agreement, Henry VI would remain king for the rest of his life. But upon his death, the crown would pass not to his son Edward, but to Richard of York or his heirs. In essence, Prince Edward's hereditary rights were revoked by law. For York, this was a historic triumph. He was no longer a claimant from the outside or a protector of the crown. He was now the official heir apparent. But for the Lancastrian camp, it was nothing short of betrayal. The most vehement opposition came from Margaret of Anjou. She categorically rejected the Act of Accord. In her eyes, the removal of her son's right to succeed was not merely a political defeat, it was the erasure of her dynasty. Margaret acted swiftly. She reached out to powerful northern nobles who still remained loyal to the Lancastrian cause. Around her gathered steadfast allies like Clifford, Northumberland, and Somerset. Though the Act of Accord was presented as a peace settlement, in reality it served as the catalyst for renewed war. For Margaret, this was no longer just about her son's rights. It had become a fight for the survival of the Lancastrian line. Following the agreement, England was effectively split in two. In the south, the Yorkists held the political centre with the support of Parliament and London. But in the north, Margaret was building a rival power base with nobles who refused to recognise the settlement. Faced with this polarisation, Richard of York chose action over caution. In December 1460, he left his sons in London and marched north with a small force of around 5,000 men. He stationed himself at Sandal Castle, near Wakefield. York's objective was to curtail Margaret's rising influence and dismantle her growing web of support among the northern lords. But the threat he faced was far greater than he anticipated. Margaret had forged a formidable alliance that included Somerset, Northumberland, and Lord Clifford. These Lancastrian commanders surrounded York's position at Sandal Castle. Some estimates place the size of the Lancastrian army at around 15,000 men, 3 times the size of York's forces. Why, then, did York advance against such a superior force with so few troops? Historians offer various interpretations. The most common view is that York believed the enemy forces were divided, and that he could strike before they consolidated. Some sources suggest he had received intelligence that a portion of the Lancastrian camp was prepared to defect. If so, this misinformation may have been a deliberate trap. On 30 December 1460, York left the safety of the castle and led his troops into open battle. But his plan quickly collapsed. The Lancastrians, far from being disorganized, responded with a well-coordinated assault. The Yorkist lines, overwhelmed and outnumbered, soon broke formation. What followed was less a battle and more a massacre. York's son, Edmund, Earl of Rutland, only 17 years old, tried to flee the field, but he was captured near a riverbank by Lord Clifford. According to several chroniclers, Clifford killed him mercilessly, despite his youth, a deed that would become a powerful symbol of vengeance for the Yorkist cause. Richard of York himself was also killed. Some accounts say in battle, others that he was captured and executed. His head was severed, mounted on a spike, and displayed above Micklegate Bar in the city of York. It was mockingly adorned with a paper crown, and beneath it hung a chilling message, "Let York look upon York." York's ally Salisbury was captured a few days later and executed. In the span of just a few days, the Yorkist faction lost 3 of its most prominent leaders: Richard of York, his son Edmund, and the Earl of Salisbury. The Battle of Wakefield stands as one of the most traumatic episodes of the Wars of the Roses. For the Yorkist cause, it was not merely a military defeat, it was a dynastic catastrophe. After this, the conflict would shift from a matter of principle to a struggle for revenge. Wakefield was more than a battlefield loss. It was a historical collapse for the Yorkist movement. Richard of York's army, vastly outnumbered and surrounded by unexpectedly unified Lancastrian forces, was crushed. Tactical miscalculations, numerical disadvantage, and possibly deliberate misinformation had made defeat almost inevitable. Richard of York was killed in the fighting. Some sources claim he died in combat, others suggest he was captured and executed afterward. But the outcome was the same. The founder of the Yorkist cause was no more. Even more shocking was the death of his son. Edmund, Earl of Rutland, was just 17 years old. As he attempted to flee the field, he was captured near the river by Lord Clifford. According to some accounts, Rutland knelt and begged for mercy, but Clifford killed him without hesitation. The event would become a lasting symbol of Yorkist vengeance, passed down for generations. Salisbury, the father of Richard Neville, was taken prisoner. The following day, without any form of trial, he was executed. This act reflected the hardening stance of the Lancastrian leadership. Wakefield had made the conflict a fight to the death. But the most chilling message came with the fate of Richard of York's head. It was severed, mounted on a pike, and displayed atop the walls of the city of York. A paper crown was mockingly placed upon it. This was not merely political theatre, it was a public humiliation and a declaration of dominance. Wakefield was not just a battle, it was the destruction of a generation. Yet from the ashes of this disaster, a new figure would rise. Richard's surviving eldest son, Edward of March.